Our guest this week is Simon Stephenson, former Pixar screenwriter and author of Set My Heart to 5. The TV series ER inspired him to become a doctor, but he really wanted to be a writer.
The irony of ending up in Hollywood writing stories for a living, I think it turns out that what I was drawn to in ER was the storytelling rather than necessarily the blood and guts.
Welcome to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline. I am your host, Monica Hadley. My mom, Caroline's not with us today, but stay tuned or come back next week and she'll be with us again. And some of you long-term listeners know, Mom's 85, and so sometimes reading a book every week, she's not quite up to that. So, but she's doing great despite COVID. And I would like to introduce our guest today, Simon Stephenson, author of Set My Heart to 5. Simon is a former Pixar screenwriter and an author based in Los Angeles. Welcome to Writers' Voices, Simon.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here with you today.
So, Simon, give us a little more background because although, being a former Pixar screenwriter is a pretty good cred, I have a feeling there's a little more to you.
Sure, great question. There's a little bit even of backstory, I think, to that short bio was, I think I wasn't contracted. I wasn't really supposed to mention that I worked at Pixar. You're not supposed to mention it until the movies come out. And So was always telling the publishers they couldn't mention that. And I think on the proof copy of the book, there was quite a different sort of lengthy bio. And then, that one came through the post and I saw that it had been substituted with former Pixar screenwriter. So there are other things about me. I am, what can I tell you? I'm from Edinburgh in Scotland. I've lived in Los Angeles and California more broadly for the past 7 or 8 years. Before I was a writer, I was a physician. And then from being a physician, I wrote a memoir, which came out in 2011. And then I've mainly been working as a screenwriter ever since, including at Pixar, but also some other things as well. So,
wow. We don't see too many people who go from being physicians to being screenwriters. Tell me a little more about how that transition happened.
Yeah. Well, I think there's quite a history of, doctors who become writers and writers become doctors, going all the way back to, and not that I would ever dream of comparing myself to them, but, I guess a couple of the luminaries would be Chekhov was a doctor and, Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame was a doctor. So there's quite a history. And I think there's more of an overlap than people often realize because I think, yes, of course you need, the science knowledge and all of that for medicine, but ultimately it's communicating with people about their lives. And so, if you want to be a writer, kind of what you want to do is you want to communicate with people and, you want to communicate about their lives. So spending, years in medical school and emergency room, kind of being privileged to hear about, the most intimate details of people's lives is probably, it's probably a pretty good training. I say all that though, that's the sort of, I guess that's the sanitized noble version. Probably the interesting bit is that so I always wrote along the way when I went to university. It was like, was I going to study medicine or English? In the UK, you do medicine as your undergraduate degree, which means that you make that decision a bit sooner than you do in the United States. And I think that's fine if you're a smart, precocious 15-year-old who knows what you want from life. That's perfectly reasonable to decide to become a doctor at that point. If you're me and the first series of ER starts on television just at the wrong time, then that's a problem because you just think I'm gonna do that. And then the irony, of course, of ending up in Hollywood writing stories for a living. I think it turns out that what I was drawn to in ER was the storytelling rather than necessarily the blood and guts. But then the last bit of the puzzle is that the thing that so I always wrote and I went back and forth from writing in medicine and I would work in medicine for a bit, the money would run out, and I'd work in medicine for a bit and earn some money to go and write, and then the money would run out and I would slink back to my night shifts in the emergency room. But about
back.
7 or 8 years ago, I learned very early on not to leave with too much of a flourish because I would be coming back, And so about 7 or 8 years ago, I wrote a screenplay, which was about, I was a children's doctor by the end of my time in medicine, and I wrote a screenplay about a depressed children's doctor who hated his job and desperately needed a change. And I don't know where I got the idea from. It popped into my head like magic.
Is that irony or sarcasm?
It's maybe it's both.
I think your character in Set My Heart to 5 would know exactly what that was.
He would scientifically analyze it, absolutely.
And, yes, and he would tell us.
Yeah. He would get to the bottom of it. Yeah, and he would point out that he had made a hilarious joke. Exactly.
Yes.
So, and so weirdly that actually opened up, some doors for me, and that kind of led to my, it was the popular script around town here in Los Angeles for a few weeks, and it opened up some doors, and I kind of, didn't look back.
So did you write that as a screenplay?
That was a screenplay. Yeah. So I'd done a bit of screenwriting before then. The full background is I'm 42, and when I was. So bearing in mind that you go to medical school as your undergraduate degree, by the time I was already working as a doctor by the time I was 22, say. And then when I was 24, I took 6 months away from medicine to write my great book of literary short stories, because what the world desperately needed was a great book of literary short stories by me when I was 24.
Or by any 24-year-old, for that
Sure,
matter.
exactly. So thankfully and rightly, no one wanted them. But one of them got made into a short film, which kind of did okay. And so off the back of that, I got some, television writing work, way back when, and it was the 2000s in Britain, so it wasn't the glory days of British TV, and it wasn't my glory days of writing, but nonetheless it was a great training ground, a great testing ground, and so the journey from there was that the big event, I guess, in my life at that time was that I lost my brother. I was 26, he was 27. We lost him in the Indian Ocean tsunami in Thailand. And after that happened, I couldn't write for a long time, and I went back to medicine, and I ended up writing a memoir about losing my brother and all of that stuff. And then after that was published, I felt like I was gonna write a novel now, because that's what grown-up writers do, right? They write a novel. So,
of course.
And so, I quit my job again with a giant flourish and sat down to write my novel, and I just couldn't do it. I started 5 or 6, and I got 10 or 20,000 words into all of them, and just nothing would quite take. And they were all, with hindsight, I think they all would have been, perfectly good books. But I think that the book about my brother had just been so personal. It just kind of taken so much out of me that I just couldn't do it. And, a friend said, Luke, why don't you, you used to like writing the screenplays, why don't you try that again? Because, apart from anything else, it's shorter and it'll be quicker. And he was right. And so, that's the sort of, I guess that's the convoluted, story of my writing life until now.
Well, you do mention that there is a long history of doctors writing and writers being doctors. Certainly with TV and movies, it's ever popular TV series set in hospitals, ERs. We can all name, going back to Marcus Welby, MD. And so having a writer who actually knows what goes on there would certainly be helpful. But this book is a little different than that. Although you do have some medical scenes in here too.
There's a touch of it. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I've always been quite resistant to writing about medicine. Like most of the meetings that I get out here in Los Angeles, I tend to get invited to a meeting because they tell me they want to hear my ideas for a new comedy show. Then, you get in there and they close the door and they say, right, medical show. Are you going to write us a medical show? And I kind of felt like I had, it's like a slightly different part of my brain, I think, apart from anything else. And, I've always kind of liked to keep the two things like slightly separate. So yeah, I wish I could crack the big medical show, because of course then, you get to retire and all the rest of it. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, so in Set My Heart to Five, there's one character who's a doctor, and interestingly enough, he's a doctor who wishes he had been a film director. I'm a
where
doctor
did you get that idea?
Well, exactly. Who knows? And it's true. I mean, I think definitely, my experience in medicine, I had so many colleagues that were so talented in other areas. I think it's quite common really for people to have, passions outside medicine. And unfortunately for some of us, I think it's a job that just doesn't leave you enough space to pursue those other things. And I'm just always in so much admiration because there are people that manage to, hold down, really busy medical careers whilst being best-selling writers. And I don't know any of them ever managed to do that.
Yeah, I think it would be really tough. I interviewed a few of them. The names aren't coming to my mind right now, but the question we always have is, when do you sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a really valid question. I think the trick is that they're all just so incredibly efficient. I think they're the people that actually genuinely do get up at 5 a.m. and write for an hour and a half, and all they do for that hour and a half is write. Whereas, when I log onto the computer, I check my email and I read the news and read the entire rest of the internet before settling down. So I think,
don't forget Twitter.
So I had to join Twitter for to promote this book, and it's a black hole, isn't it?
It's the most addictive thing ever.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I have far less time now, and I don't think it's great for the old mental health sometimes.
Yeah, there's that too. But there's such interesting people that you feel like you get to know them. I've been following another writer, Susan Orlean. Do you know who she is?
Absolutely, yeah, love her.
She is a Twitter star, believe me.
Yeah, I saw her thread about when she was drinking the wine.
Yes. I think that's what put her on the top of the map there.
Brilliant. Well, that's great. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that happens, is wonderful, isn't it? And that sort of makes you think that, the rest of it is probably worth just about putting up with.
Yeah, that's true. So, tell us a little bit about Set My Heart to Five and what it's about and where the idea came from.
Great. Yeah. So I think the first thing to say, and, I would ask your listeners please not to switch off when I say this next sentence, is that it's set in 2054. I ask people not to switch off because I think almost inevitably now when we talk about the future, I think our natural default is to think that the world is a dystopia. I think we're sort of so, we've read and watched so many dystopias, and of course also, we somewhat live in one as well now. So I share that sort of concern. And I think my idea of the future has always been like a little bit more hopeful, but also a little bit funnier and a little bit, in Britain, we have this phrase that things are more likely to be cock up than conspiracy. And so, of course, if you watch, or read, a dystopian book, usually it's Big Brother, it's the sinister government that are sort of, have ruthlessly and efficiently made some terrible system. Whereas, I feel like they don't really account enough for just, good old fashioned human error, which seems to be something we're very good at as humans. So,
I know that's part of why I'm like, how do people believe these conspiracy theories? Do you ever have you known ever people who could keep a secret, for one? Like a large group of people who are keeping a secret from everybody else.
Absolutely. That's exactly my take on it as well. And, people talk about, I'm British, so we spend a lot of time wondering, what Boris Johnson's, wider game plan is. And he's clearly just making up as he goes along.
Oh, of course. Because, they're not smarter than us.
No, exactly. And as you say, just the organization that you would need to really, pull off any kind of conspiracy, because of course, yes, there's you and your fellow conspirators, but then, these ideas that, these big societal scale ideas, that you'd need to have, everybody that's driving you places involved in it, and, everybody that's feeding you involved in it. And I think, as you say, people just, people like to talk.
Yeah.
So I feel like we would know more about it. So, that all means that the 2054 in the book, is, I'm not calling it a dystopia. I've invented my own word, which is a mystopia. So the idea is that humans have just, everything's missed the mark a bit, so it's a world that's gone a bit wrong, but simply just because of human error. So, some of the things, so a big one is that humans have locked themselves out of the internet. And we did that by, when you go to log on your email and you've forgotten your password, and it sends a prompt, it sends a thing to your old email, and then you have to go into your old email, but you've also forgotten the password for that one, and it asks you the name of your first pet and your favorite teacher. And so the idea is that as humans, we've all forgotten, or a critical number of us have forgotten the names of our first pets and our favorite teachers. And this leads to this sort of panicked wave of forgetting where we all get locked out of the internet, at which point, planes start falling from the sky, and, houses start burning themselves down, and just everything, everything that's sort of dependent on the internet goes wrong. So that happens. Other things include, on a sort of geopolitical, the moon, exactly, yes. So the moon is Elon Musk has incinerated the moon, and I should say that he's done it in what at the time he said was a hilarious prank, but he subsequently says is a tragic accident, and it wasn't intentional, but it was a prank. And in fairness to Elon Musk, obviously, I have no evidence that he's planning to incinerate the moon. That would be the kind of conspiracy that I think people would probably know about fairly quickly. And really, it could have been, any kind of space billionaire gone wild. And just the thing was, at the time I was writing the book, was right around when Elon Musk, he launched that Tesla into deep space. And so he was in sort of full prank mode there.
Right.
And then also, I guess, in that world of 2054, on the geopolitical scale, North Korea and New Zealand have annihilated themselves with nuclear weapons. They've annihilated each other. The backstory to that is North Korea were kind of looking for a way to show off their prowess, and they were looking for a country they could, destroy with nuclear weapons that no one would mind if they destroyed it. And they chose New Zealand because they didn't think anyone would notice, let alone mind. And of course, people did notice and very much minded. And that means we have neither of those two countries left anymore by 2054. So that's all the sort of, is it comic? Is it dark? I don't know that, but that's the world of 2054. But the good news is, that we have made some technological progress, and so we have androids. And androids are, I think, for anyone, I wasn't a science fiction person, so I had to learn this. So just in case anyone is like me and wasn't fully up on the terminology, so an android is a robot with a human appearance, and they can range from C-3PO right through to, someone who looks like a full human. And our androids in the book look, they're physically human, because what they are is they're made from human DNA. So you're probably aware of, there's this amazing technology now called CRISPR, which means that we can edit the human genome like almost at will. And so the idea is that the technology isn't far off of. The hard bit is we have to identify the part of the human genome that codes for consciousness. But once we've done that, then all they have to do is take that out and swap in, the source code for Windows 97. And then we'll have fully programmable humans. So the idea is that by 2054, we have these androids who are, human bodies, but they have these, biological computer brains. And we make them do the jobs that we don't want to do. And one of those jobs is very much dentistry. So one thing about androids as well is that they're going to be better than us at everything. I mean, if you think about it, they're going to be like my MacBook is basically better than me at everything already. So, like.
But
maths,
it does not have opposable thumbs.
It doesn't have opposable thumbs. That's very true. But an Android will.
Exactly.
But the other thing it doesn't have is feelings. So as humans, we're going to be very protective of our feelings. And so if an android ever sort of shows any hint of feelings, we're going to have that android wiped or destroyed, because the feelings really and emotions, that's the only advantage we have left. And so Jared, the narrator of the book, is an android, and he's programmed to work as a dentist, and he's, kind of just doing his programmed work as a dentist, and a few things happen, and he shares a building, as we may have mentioned, with his human doctor colleague, and he goes to see the doctor, and the doctor says, I think, Jared, you might be depressed. And Jared says, well, I can't be depressed because that's a feeling, and I don't have feelings because I'm not allowed to have feelings. And the doctor says, well, how about we do an experiment? And Jared, being an android, loves experiments because they're science, right? So that's fun for an android. And he says, great, well, yeah, sure, what's the experiment? And the doctor sends him to see an old movie, because old movies are one of the things which make us humans feel. And so Jared goes to see this old movie, and he, at the end of the movie, he notices that his shirt is wet and he can't work it out because he doesn't have allergies, and no one's throwing liquid on him as far as he knows. And he eventually deduces that it must just have been allergies. There must have been some sort of strong cleaning solvent that was used in the theater, and it provoked him to cry this 27 milliliters of tears approximately. And so he goes back to see the doctor, and the doctor says, well, what I didn't tell you was the movie you saw was actually a tearjerker, and that's a movie that's designed to make people cry. And this puts Jared in a terrible bind, because as an android, he's not supposed to have feelings, and feelings have terrible consequences for androids. But then also he's just taken part in this experiment, and he knows that, you can't question the results of a well-conducted experiment, which this was. So this kind of begins a process of emotional awakening for Jared, which is tied in with a sort of developing love of old movies. Now,
the idea of kind of computers becoming more human and taking over the world is, has been done before, but this is the first time that I've seen it in kind of really from the computer's perspective, and also in such a humorous, lighthearted way.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, and that perspective thing, I find that really interesting, because honestly, I think I realized that really late in the day. Like I think I genuinely only realized that a month or two ago, when I was talking to someone about the book, and I was trying to explain why it was different from, because of course, we're sort of inundated with stories about tech apocalypses and what's going to happen when the robots take over, and I think this person kind of said what you said, that it's from the other way around, and I was like, oh yeah, of course it is. That's exactly what's going on. And if I was a savvier marketer, I would have honed in on that myself and made that clear. But yeah,
right.
And I think it works, because I think I think in literature I often gravitate to reading about outsiders. We all love an outsider, an underdog, and I think that is that's maybe the difference here is that there's this sort of just that shift in perspective, that if there's a villain in this book, it's kind of humans.
Yeah. One of the fun things about the book is that as Jared, he goes to see these old movies, and it's kind of a way he's learning about how to be human, but he describes the movies and the plots of the movies from a perspective of, an android. But I always, and you've picked movies that almost everybody is familiar with. So it's really fun to read these descriptions and think, oh, wow, he's talking about Cinderella, or he's talking about Blade Runner, or he's talking about, Love Story. That was one of the first. Was that the first one? Love Story.
That is the first movie. Yeah.
Now that one, maybe not everyone's familiar with, because that would have been the early 70s. Because I remember.
You're right. It's perfect. Yeah, it's 1970, I think. Exactly.
Yeah. And so, I'm surprised you even know that movie.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm a screenwriter, so it's kind of my job to, have watched all the old movies. But, it's an interesting one. Just to sort of say that the explanation for why these are the movies that people are watching in 2054 is, the idea is that if we continue on our current trajectory by 2054, all the mainstream movies which show in the multiplex, or what will by then be the megaplex, are just going to be these, Marvel extravaganzas. So, 5-hour long killer robot epics. So those are the kind of the mainstream movies. And of course, Jared doesn't really want to go and see a movie about a killer robot because, as an android himself, he's not going to be into that. But what does happen is there's these, these smaller theaters, these old repertory theaters, which show old movies, sort of give the context for a movie like Love Story and why on earth people are still watching it in 2054. The idea is that the mainstream movies, if we continue on our current trajectory, by 2054, the only sort of big movies are just going to be Marvel movies. So they're going to be 5-hour long killer robot extravaganzas that play in the multiplex. And Jared's not really going to want to see that because as an android himself, he's not going to be much interested in a killer robot movie. So instead, his doctor friend tells him, well, there's also these old movies, and the old movies show in repertory cinemas. And the reason why they show things like Love Story is that I mentioned about the humans getting locked out of the internet, and that's going to cause a great crash, a great data loss event. And so what that means is that all the culture that was stored digitally, so everything from the year 2000 to about, to 2054 is just going to be lost. So all of those movies, all of those books, they're all going to be lost. And so what that means is the only old movies that are going to survive are the ones that were stored on film, which is things, and that stopped happening in about 2000. And then the ones which will really survive will just be the ones that they had made lots of prints of because, they would have the best odds of physically surviving. So the part of the joke is that, if you're a cinephile in 2020, or at least if you were in 2019, you go to your, local art house cinema and see a 4-hour long black and white French documentary from, 1949. And if you're that person in 2054, then you're going to go to your repertory cinema and see Titanic and, but still feel the same about it.
And a lot of those are tearjerkers.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is quite interesting is looking at these movies is the way in which I think there's in life and in art, I feel like there's this just constant balancing act between cynicism and sentimentality. And I feel like the over the past 50 or 60 years, certainly in movies, the sort of, the balance, the sentimentality has just, decreased and decreased and decreased, and cynicism has just increased and increased and increased. And I think you see it actually in Love Story that, like, a movie like Love Story, which was a huge hit at the time, we look at that now and just think, oh, it's so mawkish and manipulative and sentimental, and
yes.
People just say terrible things about it. And then something like like Forrest Gump plays a part in the book, and Forrest Gump, I think, is it's a very sentimental movie, but it's still only maybe half as sentimental as Love Story, because in Forrest Gump you have the wonderful character of Lieutenant Dan who brings the cynicism, and I feel like now in 2020, we were talking about Twitter earlier, that we're just almost nothing but snark.
Oh, yeah.
And it's interesting progress.
It's interesting that you talk about that, because I was just talking about this with someone the other day. Having another movie from around the same time as Love Story was the Billy Jack movies. I think there might have been 2 of them. And they were such a big deal to my age group at that time, which would have been, early teens. And we just thought, Billy Jack was such a hero. And then 20 years later, I'm an adult, I have kids of my own, I'm watching that movie and I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's a jerk. And
But Billy Jack was like a soldier turned vigilante or something like
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah. And they were fighting. They were rebels, basically rebelling against the societal structures and so forth. And
sure.
And it was all of the kind of the special. They didn't really have a lot of special effects, but just the technology of making movies back then looks so pathetic now with what we're used to.
Absolutely, and that's the thing that like our TVs are too good now. So like even stuff that would have looked okay on a cinema screen in 1970, your modern TV shows actually a much finer level of detail, and that's partly why things just look so bad and particularly special effects just look embarrassing.
Although Star Wars has kind of withstood the test of time.
I mean that's interesting. Yeah, I think they've often been sort of remastered and I wonder if they've been touched up a bit. Like it would be interesting to see an original one on television. I don't know how it would do.
Yeah. You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Simon Stephenson, author of Set My Heart to 5. Simon, before we run out of time, would you like to read a little bit from the book?
I would love to, yeah. I was thinking that maybe so the book is written in the voice of Jared, and he's an android, and I was thinking it might make sense to just kind of to read the start where sort of Jared introduces himself.
I think that sounds perfect.
Great. Okay. So I'll just begin. Hi. My name is Jared. I am sincerely pleased to meet you. Also, I am a bot. Unless you have been living under a rock in North Korea or New Zealand, you of course know what a bot is. Nonetheless, I am programmed to relay the following dialogue to each new human I encounter. Please, do not be fooled by my human-like appearance. I am a mere bot. I do not have feelings or anything else that might be misconstrued as a soul. Instead, I have been programmed to a high level of proficiency in dentistry. Should you have any concerns, please immediately report me to the Bureau of Robotics. But humans rarely find this information calming. Instead, they see a fellow human standing in front of them, claiming that he is not a human. This bamboozles them. It often bamboozles them so profoundly that they exclaim, "But you look so human." I then patiently explain to them what they anyway already know, that my body looks human because it is indeed a human body. It is engineered from DNA and constructed of cells the exact same way their own body is. It has the same basic needs: food, water, oxygen, regular exercise, and it can be injured or killed in all the same comically outlandish ways any other human body can. Yet I am definitely not human, because the precious thing that sets humans apart is their feelings. And as a bot, I am specifically designed and programmed to be incapable of feelings. I can no more feel than a toaster. BTW. That is a hilarious joke, because the programming language I run on was in fact first developed many years ago for use in the domestic toaster. Here is something curious I have observed about humans. Informing them I am incapable of feeling often makes them feel sad. I suspect they believe they are being empathic, but in fact, they are being paradoxical. After all, feeling sad in response to someone telling you they lack feelings is like running a marathon in response to somebody telling you they lack legs. Truly, if I lacked legs and somebody ran a marathon on my behalf, I would not consider them empathic. I would consider them confused. Nonetheless, it makes them sad, and making humans sad goes against my core programming. If ever I accidentally render a human sad in this way, I therefore quickly employ self-deprecating humor to amend the situation with reassuring levity. So I tell the human they can think of me as a microwave oven with feet, a mobile telephone with arms, a toaster with a heart. BTW. I mean a heart in the sense of a mechanical pump, not a bucket of feelings. The hearts of us bots are only ever mechanical pumps, and they certainly do not contain anything as precious as a human heart of hearts. Humans are only sad about our lack of feelings because they do not comprehend all the incredible advantages this gives us. To start with just one important example, a bot's self-preservation instincts are based not on a human-type delusion that we are irreplaceable, but calculated on a rational cost-benefit analysis. It is hardly a coincidence that many bots have already made heroic and self-sacrificing contributions in fields as varied as nuclear firefighting, bomb disposal, and NFL football playing. My own vocation of dentistry is also ideal work for a bot. But this is not because we are expendable. After all, dentistry is rarely fatal. At least, it is not fatal for the dentist. Ha! No, the primary reason bots make such excellent dentists is our complete inability to feel empathy. An empathic dentist, by which I mean a human dentist, could easily become distracted by inappropriate fear, criticism, or even mere crying from a patient. A bot is immune to all of these things and will get the job done every time, even when it comes to wisdom teeth removal. Of course, the other reason why dentistry is ideal work for bots is that no human wants to do it anymore. Humans prefer jobs that are creative, social, clean, luxurious, and can be completed from a home office between breakfast and lunch. They strongly dislike jobs which involve an actual office, weekend work, children, blood, screaming, and the mouths of strangers. Therefore, when the laws reserving jobs for humans were being passed, nobody spoke up for dentistry, especially not the dentists. Ha!
And there we meet Jared in Set My Heart to 5.
Yeah, that is Jared and his dentistry career. I haven't. Every time I read that, I'm reminded that I haven't told my own dentist yet about this book. He's been very supportive. He knows I'm a writer, and every time I go in there, he asks me what I'm writing, and I tell him I'm writing this book, and it's coming out soon, and I'll send him one. And now I'm kind of in this terrible bind where I don't know what to do.
I was going to say, have you gotten any pushback from dentists on this?
No, and it's a particularly difficult issue for me because so I'm British and I live in America, and obviously, there's an American stereotype about British teeth, which is not entirely unfounded. It has to be said. You guys take very good care of your teeth, and we're not quite as advanced dentally as you are over here. And so when I first moved here, I avoided going to the dentist for a good few years because I was, so worried that they were going to, just look in my mouth and, not let me leave the office for 3 weeks whilst they did all this emergency dental work. And eventually, I asked a few British friends who live here, and they said, yeah, we've got this great guy, and he's good because he does British teeth. Like he knows not to try and fix everything, and he just does what he has to. So, I think I've got one of the few dentists in Los Angeles who is willing to just, accept my teeth, aren't ever going to be quite perfect. And I may have just alienated him. So it's a tough life as a writer.
Now, I understand that Set My Heart to 5 is going to be made into a movie.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed. I've probably been, around the film industry for long enough that, I kind of know, you're not supposed to ever get too excited until the cameras start rolling. Mm. And even then, you're actually not supposed to get too excited until the movie opens. But we are, I think we are in a really pretty great position. So I was very lucky that, a great director, enjoyed the book and wanted to, try to turn it into a film. So, the director is Edgar Wright, who, most recently made Baby Driver, which I think, lots of people enjoyed. I certainly loved it. And before that, he made a trio of films in Britain, Shaun of the Dead and, Hot Fuzz and The World's End. So yeah, he, I think is just, the absolute dream director for a story like this because he's funny and he's also obviously a very passionate cinephile like Jared is. So yeah, we have we have a script, but there's so many moving parts in the movie picture industry at the best of time, and obviously it's not the best of times with the pandemic on and so on. So yeah, I'm
so it
very
may
hopeful.
be a while.
It may be a while. I mean, who knows? But yeah, it's definitely not going to be this holiday season. We can say
right.
that.
Now, I know that normally when movies are made out of books, the author of the book does not write the screenplay. But because you've got screenplay writing experience, are you going to be involved in writing the screenplay?
I am, yeah. I've been writing the screenplay, and I mean, I should say that I think historically you're right. I think it's getting more and more common though. So like I know that, like, you know, for instance, someone like Gillian Flynn, who wrote, you know, Gone Girl and Sharp Objects and those things. I think she wrote the movies of those, and you know, made that tradition fairly seamlessly. Likewise, Room, which I think actually, I think it was nominated for Best Screenplay. I don't think it won it, but Emma Donoghue that wrote Room, I think wrote the screenplay as well. So I think it does happen sort of more and more, and I think it kind of makes sense because, of course, yes, it's laid out on the page differently, but like, you know, I think at a certain point, writing is writing. It's been a very interesting experience though, because I've had, you know, as a screenwriter, I've had jobs to adapt other people's novels. And I've always been so careful and protective of the vision of the novelist, you know, i.e. not myself, but, you know, the person that wrote the novel. And, you know, I've never wanted to change anything because I wanted to keep it true to their vision. And because this one's my own one, I've actually felt much more liberated to say, well, I don't know what I was thinking there. Let's get rid of that bit, you know.
So when you take a book, so this book is, 400 and some pages, and the movie will be an hour and a half?
Yeah, I think an hour and a half, couple of hours. I think that's standard.
Somewhere in there. And you have to leave a lot out, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the challenge. I think conventionally, like the big challenge, and I think it was true of this one. So because this novel's written in voice, it's written in the first person, in the novel, you know, you can just have Jared telling you everything. You know, you can have him say, I felt this and I felt that, and, you know, I didn't want to be a dentist because of this. But one of the great movie maxims is show, don't tell. So a big part of the job is, I suppose, dramatizing that interior monologue. That, like, how can we, you know, I can write a funny line in the book where Jared's, you know, makes some joke about dentistry, but how can we actually show that in moving pictures rather than have him simply telling the joke? And that's, I think, is always, you know, one of the big, just, I don't know if it's challenge so much as just like, that's naturally where the work is.
Of course. I never really thought about how much, in some ways, a first person novel would be harder to adapt because so much of the exposition, you're inside the person's head.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
yeah.
Third person, of course, you don't tend to be, you know, there are some exceptions, but you don't tend to be as much in the head. So, wow. Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge. And so, that's mostly been where the work is. And, you know, some of it is you know, involves reconfiguring things. Some of it, I think, I think the advantage though of having written it in the first person is, like, I feel like I absolutely know Jared and I know what he would do in any particular circumstance. So even though you maybe can't have him telling you the things that he tells you in the book, I think that knowledge of who he is can kind of inform, you know, like, you know what he would do in you know, if he walked into a coffee shop or if he walked into a library, like you kind of have an immediate sense of, well, Jared would do this or Jared wouldn't do that. So I think that's part of it. And then, yeah, just necessarily, I think in the overall narrative, you know, I think usually stuff needs to come out to simply, you know, be able to tell that story over a couple of hours. I probably had a bit of an advantage in this, that, when I decided I was going to be writing this book about this android screenwriter and that he was going to fall in love with the kind of movies that, in all honesty, I fell in love with. A lot of these are the movies I grew up with. I set myself this slightly unusual challenge that, I wanted to try and give the reader of the book the same experience that I got when I went to see those movies. So, you know, you go on this journey, on this kind of emotional roller coaster, and at the end, you know, hopefully, you know, if you see a movie like Forrest Gump, you know, you're crying at the end, but those aren't tears of sadness. And they're not quite tears of joy either. They're sort of tears of catharsis, right? Of this kind of different emotion. So, I was trying to do that with the book as a whole, which I think hopefully then means that it in some ways naturally has the sort of shape or feel that will translate to a film fairly well.
You're listening to Writers' Voices with Monica and Caroline, and our guest today is Simon Stephenson, author of Set My Heart to 5. So, Simon, in the book, Jared has the Dr. Gunderson, is that his name?
Glundenstein, yeah. Glundenstein is that, yeah.
Okay. Gives Jared this feeling wheel to help him identify these new feelings that he's having. And at first I was like, well, how would that work? How do you identify a feeling just because it's on this list? But then you had some examples in there of how feelings were being described. Does such a thing actually exist?
It absolutely does, 1,000%. I stole it wholesale from real life. So one of my jobs when I was a children's doctor was I did a job for a while where most of my patients were kids with Asperger's or autism, and it's one of the tools that we used with them that because sometimes in those conditions, and I think a lot of us can relate to these things anyway, that emotions can be strange and difficult things to handle. And, the first part of it is often just understanding what is this feeling that I'm feeling. And so I think, how Jared does it in the book is it tends to be the feelings on the feeling wheel. They're kind of laid out in a spectrum. It's a sort of circular spectrum. So you can kind of say, okay, it's, the feeling I'm feeling, it's like sad. I know what sad is. It's like sad, but it's not quite that. It's sad, but it's got some other element. I wonder if it's melancholy. That's the one that's next door. Or, I wonder if it's pessimism or so yeah, it's a real thing. Some people in the real world find that feelings wheel quite a useful tool. I mean, others don't. Jared, I think, he sort of sees it more as a manifesto of like, wow, look at all these wonderful feelings I have to explore. And, so he has a great time with, for instance, you or I wouldn't enjoy regret, but, the first time Jared, deliberately experiences regret, he loves it because, it's just like savoring a new exotic flavor that he's never tasted before. And then on the reverse of the feelings wheel, of course, is the slightly more, the more complex feelings. And Jared fairly quickly hones in onto his favorite feeling in the world, which is Schadenfreude, the German word for the taking pleasure in the small suffering of others. And this is sort of amazing to Jared that this is even a real feeling at all. And he has this sort of robot logic, and one of the things that he then decides is, well, if only the Germans have a word for this feeling, then the Germans must be just the most fun people of all. I should really try and meet some Germans to hang out with.
So, Simon, I'd really like to know what of you is in Jared?
Great question. I've got a horrible feeling that it's an awful lot of me. People tell me, oh, I love this, android you wrote, he's so ridiculous and funny, and I was like, oh really? Because I feel like maybe that might be I think in the bigger picture, Jared's search is for connection, right? He feels a little bit isolated and a little bit alone, and he wants to feel more connected in the world, and he feels like he can see it, like he can see how it could be, and he can see other people forming these connections very easily. And for him, I think he overthinks things in that slightly too logical way, and he worries about offending people because he's programmed to be polite. And I think a lot of those, I 1,000% relate to. And they're probably a bit heightened in Jared, but I think, that idea of, that we're searching as humans, we're all sort of searching for connection. And, so many of us, although it's the quiet part that we so rarely say out loud, but so many of us, would like to feel more connected and, just don't always quite know how to do it.
Yeah. And we forget sometimes how important connection really is. Everything else is really all about that, but we can get distracted.
I mean, completely. It's I was saying, earlier on that the thing that sets us apart from the androids is emotions, but actually that may not be true. Or maybe emotions is part of the puzzle, because our ability to connect to each other, is probably the most uniquely human thing about us, right? That's, obviously animals can form those bonds as well, and they can form them with us. But in terms of us versus the machines, those human connections are, one of the most special things we have. And I think they're one of the things we've all been missing the most in this pandemic, right? Is that just that little thing.
I was just thinking about, I live alone, and I am being very careful in the pandemic because I go see my mother, who's, half an hour away, and I'm the only person who's really, that she's seeing on a regular basis in the house. I wear a mask when I'm around her, but, she's 85, so I'm just being extra cautious. So I was just thinking, I'm like not touching anybody. And normally I have my grandkids. I'm near, I spend a lot of time with them, but they're in Texas now, and
sure.
So there's no one that I'm like touching, and it's weird.
Yeah.
Now I'm an introvert and I'm not a hugger, so it doesn't bother me as much as some, but still.
Sure. Yeah, that's funny, because I was going to say that. I was going to say that I'm an introvert, and if I never hug you, maybe that's too extreme, but the hugging isn't necessarily something that I miss. And actually, it's not so much the hugging; it's the Jared's quite awkward, and he definitely gets that from me. That I never quite know. Are we hugging? Are we shaking hands? Are we being European and kissing the cheeks? And I'm so glad that's off the table. I can absolutely live without that. But I suppose, for me, I think it's almost like it's not the physical contact, but it's just those minor little social contacts. So I live by myself as well, and things just going and buying a coffee and just having that little bit of chit chat with the person working in the coffee store, or the person sitting next to you. I think those little bits of human connection are really important to us. And, they're probably things that obviously we haven't been buying coffee for thousands of years, but we've probably been interacting with other humans for thousands of years in a way that this is probably the first time in hundreds of years, thousands of years of humans' history for many of us that we've had so little just
human
social contact.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Simon, I wanted to mention, in the book, you have scenes that are written as screenplay, kind of set into the book. And tell us why you did that and what that accomplishes.
Absolutely. So there was a couple of things behind that. One was that just, so I'm not giving anything away when I say that, part of Jared's journey is he decides he's going to write a screenplay. And I felt like, to be writing about this character, writing a screenplay, it just felt sort of kind of necessary that, we should have some in screenplay so we can see what he's doing, and we can see, obviously it's something I work with every day, but, I know a lot of people, they probably know what it looks like, but they're probably not super intimately familiar with it. So partly it was just, if I'm going to write a novel that involves screenwriting, let's have some screenwriting in there. Then kind of what happened was I realized that it was actually, and it's funny, we were talking about earlier with that first person internal monologue thing, that the screenplay sections, even though they're, written by Jared, they give you this chance to kind of, I guess, take the point of view away from him and sort of just put the camera in the corner of the room. And so it doesn't feel like Jared telling you, and then this happened. Like it feels like a little bit more like you're watching it unfold. And so those bits where that happens, they tend to be some of the more emotional bits in the book because, and that's kind of deliberate because I feel that like having someone say, oh, this happened to me and it made me very sad, can be less strong than having, just seeing something happen to Jared and realizing, wow, that's a very sad thing to happen to that android. So that was part of it. And then I suppose the last thing I should say is I thought I was very clever by inventing this brilliant, groundbreaking technique of having these, having this, and of course it's been done so many times before. It turns out, I even knew because there's a Truman Capote book called Music for Chameleons, and in the second half of that, he does these things called conversational portraits. That are exactly that. He follows his housekeeper around New York for a day and writes about it, while also, in prose and then in screenplay. And even someone recently pointed out, Moby Dick, there's a chapter of Moby Dick that's in the form of a stage play.
Oh, wow.
So
well,
yeah,
either I didn't get that far in the book or I have forgotten it.
Sure, I had forgotten. I love that book. I've actually read it a couple of times, and somehow I claim I'd forgotten. Maybe it was there in my subconscious, and that was where I got the idea from.
Wow. Now there's a couple of other little things throughout the book and that make it the style a little different, and it's because it's from the point of view of an android, so he's thinking a little differently. But the one I wasn't quite sure what it meant was 10/10.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah. So that is it's 10 out of 10. So Jared, I think at some point has heard someone say 10 out of 10, which is something that's as good as it can be, or sort of maximal.
Okay. So he puts that in when it's something that he thinks is great. Basically.
Yeah, or that it's 100% true.
Okay. 100%. Okay, that makes more sense. Yeah. So this has been a real fun conversation, Simon.
Yeah,
and,
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, but I think we're about out of time, and it sounds like your dog might need some attention.
That is my neighbour's dog. I'm so sorry. We've had a few technical difficulties here, and I came to the other side of right where the router is, and yeah.
Gotcha. Well, usually before we close, when my mom's on the show, she does a quote that has something to do with the book. So I found a quote that I would like to end with.
It's wonderful.
From Brené Brown, and it says, "Connection is why we are here. We are hardwired to connect with others. It is what gives purpose and meaning to our lives, and without it, there is suffering."
Isn't that absolutely perfect?
It absolutely is. So thank you so much for being with us today, Simon.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. And again, my apologies for the barking dogs and all the rest of it.
That's just the world we're living in. So no apologies needed. And see you all next week on Writer's Voices.